Harbor. August 17, 1807. A strange vessel sits at the wharf near Greenwich Village, 150 feet of raw timber and iron, narrow as a barge, with two massive uncovered paddle wheels and a tall black smokestack already coughing dark plumes into the summer sky. On the banks, a crowd is gathered. Farmers, merchants, boatmen whose livelihoods have been built on wind and current for as long as anyone can remember. Their faces carry the particular expression of people who have come specifically to watch something fail. Fulton's Folly, they call it. The Devil's Sawmill. She'll explode before she clears the battery. On deck, Robert Fulton stands tall, 6 feet of coiled tension in a ruffled shirt and cutaway coat. Beside him is Chancellor Robert R. Livingston, wealthy and influential, one of the men who helped negotiate the Louisiana Purchase, who has staked his fortune and his New York steamboat monopoly on this moment. A small party of passengers, mostly Livingston's family and a few daring friends, clusters in uneasy silence. Fulton gives the signal. The engine coughs, then roars. The paddle wheels bite the water. The boat lurches forward a few yards and stops dead in the river. Laughter erupts from the shore. More jeers. "Back to your paintbrushes, Fulton." Fulton disappears below deck. Minutes tick by. The crowd grows louder. Then, suddenly, the wheels churn again. The vessel surges forward, steady, powerful, driving upstream against the tide and the light summer headwind. The laughter dies. On the bluffs above Poughkeepsie, later that day, villagers will stare in disbelief as this smoking apparition glides past at nearly 5 miles an hour, overtaking every sailboat as though they were anchored. Some will fall to their knees, convinced they are witnessing either a sea monster or the approaching judgment. But on the deck of the vessel that history will remember as the Clermont, Robert Fulton allows himself the smallest smile. After years of ridicule, after a lifetime of dreams deferred, the future has finally begun to move. Robert Fulton was not born to steam. He was born, improbably enough, to paint. He came into the world in 1765 on a hardscrabble farm in Little Britain, Pennsylvania. His father died when he was 9. The boy showed early talent with a pencil and brush, the kind of precise observational intelligence that could go in almost any direction, and that in the young republic of the 1780s most naturally expressed itself as art. Apprenticed to a jeweler in Philadelphia, Fulton mastered the delicate craft of miniature portraits painted on ivory for lockets and rings. He charmed patrons. He cultivated connections. By his early 20s, he had earned enough to sail for London with a letter of introduction from the American painter Benjamin West, intending to make his name in the portrait studios of Georgian England. He painted, and he daydreamed about machines. Fulton's mind could not stay still. He belonged to that category of restless intellects that cannot look at a road, a river, or a wheel without imagining how it might be made more efficient. In the salons of England and later France, he sketched improvements for canal locks, designed marble-cutting devices, built a panorama tower that became a Parisian tourist attraction. Art was his trade. Invention was his obsession. By the late 1790s, he had moved to France, offering Napoleon submarines and underwater torpedoes, hoping to break the British naval blockade. The emperor was intrigued, but ultimately uninterested. Fulton had gained something more valuable than a contract. He had gained experience. Years of designing, testing, failing, and redesigning. A working knowledge of what engines could and could not yet do. The particular education that comes only from repeated, expensive failure. He was, by the early 1800s, a man of hybrid talents in an age hungry for them. Artist, promoter, engineer, speculator, entrepreneur, carrying all of it, belonging entirely to none of it, perpetually standing one experiment away from either triumph or humiliation. And then, in the glittering salons of Paris, he met Robert Livingston. Robert Livingston was no ordinary investor. He was one of the great political aristocrats of the early republic, a wealthy New Yorker of towering family and influence, a man who had sat on the committee that drafted the Declaration of Independence, who had administered the oath of office to George Washington, who had just completed the most consequential land deal in American history as the minister to France, who helped negotiate the Louisiana Purchase. Livingston understood transportation the way a general understands terrain. He saw, clearly and early, that control over movement was control over wealth. and he held something extraordinary, a 20-year monopoly granted by the New York legislature for steamboat navigation on the state's waters. Others had dreamed of steam on water before. John Fitch had built experimental boats years earlier. None had achieved commercial success. Livingston needed a practical engineer who could turn theory into sustainable profit. Fulton needed capital and political protection. The partnership they formed was not born in a single dramatic handshake. It grew from the quiet recognition of shared ambition across a dinner table in Paris. Two men who understood that each possessed exactly what the other lacked, and that together they might produce something neither could build alone. Livingston financed the experiments. Fulton designed. In 1803, they launched a test boat on the River Seine. It moved 4 miles an hour against the current, and then the hull cracked and she sank. Undeterred, Fulton ordered a more powerful Boulton & Watt steam engine from England and sailed for New York in 1806. There, in a shipyard on the East River, the North River Steamboat, soon to be known to history as the Clermont, took shape. She was no graceful clipper. She was a floating workshop, long, narrow, ungainly, her paddle wheels exposed to the elements, her boiler crude by any later standard, her engine noisy and smoky and magnificent. Skeptics called her every name but her own. But Livingston never wavered. He had seen the future in Fulton's drawings and in that brief, glorious run on the Seine. The monopoly gave them exclusive rights to steam navigation on New York waters. Now all that remained was proof. After the brief stall at the start, quickly repaired by Fulton's own hands, the Clermont settled into her stride. She passed the Palisades. She slipped past sloops bound downstream whose captains stared in open-mouthed astonishment as this ungainly thing left them behind without a sail raised. Fulton wrote of the moment. The murmurs of discontent changed to cheers when those watching from the bank saw that the vessel advanced steadily. 32 hours after leaving New York, the Clermont reached Albany, 150 miles against the current. The return trip was faster still. Within weeks, Fulton and Livingston had her refitted for regular passenger service. The monopoly was no longer a piece of paper. It was a license to transform the Hudson River into America's first commercial steam highway. The wind and the current had ruled the rivers since the first canoe. Robert Fulton ended their reign. For centuries, American rivers had been, in the most fundamental sense, one-way streets. You floated downstream with the current, you struggled back upstream by sail or oar, if the wind cooperated, if the weather held, if the tides ran right. The interior of the continent remained locked behind that stubborn fact. The Mississippi, the Ohio, the Missouri, the great arterial system of the West, could carry goods out, but bringing them back was slow, expensive, and uncertain. Entire economic worlds were shaped by those limits. Settlement patterns, prices, market distances, migration routes, everything bent around the ancient authority of current and wind. Steam changed the terms entirely. It did not simply move faster. It moved independently. It did not negotiate with nature. It imposed a schedule upon it. Fire made steam. Steam drove machinery. Machinery beat the river. Within 4 years of the Clermont's maiden voyage, Fulton and his partners launched the New Orleans, the first steamboat on the Mississippi River. Within a decade, paddle-wheelers were churning every major western river. By the 1820s, freight rates had plummeted, settlement had surged, and the economic geography of the American interior was being remade at a speed that would have been unimaginable to the men who had struggled upstream by oar and sail. Cotton from the Deep South, grain from the Midwest, manufactured goods from the East, all flowing in both directions with clockwork reliability. The economic integration that bound the young republic together, that made a continental United States not just possible but inevitable, accelerated dramatically in the years after Fulton proved that a river could be made answerable. The steamboat did not merely carry passengers to Albany. It carried the republic into a new relationship with distance, trade, and power. It helped make the American interior not just reachable, but economically connected. Towns and farms and markets bound together across distances that had previously meant isolation. The generation of American growth that followed the Clermont's maiden voyage, the explosion of river cities, the opening of the West, the cotton economy of the South, the grain economy of the Midwest, All of it was powered in part by the steam that Fulton and Livingston had learned to harness on a summer afternoon on the Hudson. Robert Fulton died in 1815, just 8 years after the Clermont's maiden voyage. He was 49 years old. He left behind a technology that was already remaking the continent, and a lesson about how revolutions actually happen. Not through isolated genius, but through partnership. Not through a single inspired moment, but through years of expensive, patient, stubborn failure. Not through invention alone, but through the combination of invention and capital and legal protection that turns a working machine into a working business. Livingston provided the money and the monopoly. Fulton provided the obsession and the skill. Together they built something neither could have built alone. That is the real story of the Clermont. Not a miracle of engineering, though it was that. Not a triumph of one man's vision, though it was that too. It was a deal. A calculated, carefully structured partnership between a painter who could not stop thinking about machines and an aristocrat who understood that controlling movement meant controlling wealth. Return to the riverbank in 1807. Watch the skeptics as the vessel recedes upstream, the smoke trailing behind it, the paddle wheels striking their unromantic, relentless beat. Watch the moment when the laughter fades and the calculation begins, when the mocker becomes the investor, when the impossible becomes the inevitable. They were not watching a boat depart. They were watching an era depart. The age of waiting on the wind, the age of surrendering to the current, the age in which the interior of a continent could be reached but not commanded. And arriving in its place, louder, smokier, more mechanical, more commercially ambitious, was an America that had learned to make the river answer. Once it learned that, almost nothing else would be allowed to remain unconquered. Next on Pivot Points. The windows were sealed shut against the summer heat. Inside, a convention was coming apart. Delegates threatening to walk out. Large states against small. A nation already failing, unable to tax, unable to enforce, unable to compel anyone to do anything. This was America's last chance, and it was collapsing in real time. Most men came to Philadelphia to argue. One man came with the argument already written. He was 36 years old, barely 5'4", soft-voiced, unassuming. The kind of man no one noticed when he walked in. He had arrived weeks before anyone else, with a plan. James Madison didn't just attend the Constitutional Convention. He controlled it. Before the first gavel fell, before the first voice was raised, before anyone else had decided what they were even there to do. James Madison. Next on Pivot Points.